do a pitch every year to make a film, and then the judges pick, and they give them $3,000-4,000, and over the course of the year, they can make their film for next year's film festival. So this was a black kid and a Jewish kid who did that pitch, and they got the grant. And I haven't seen the movie.
And I actually, believe it or not, have so the kid, the Jewish kid, did the movie. Also did a movie last year, the one about Jews surfing.
Oh,
same kid.
Okay, that was a good one.
It was cute,
that
right?
Was a good movie.
And long and short of it is so he's there, and I remember talking with him afterwards. And the
granddaughter of one of the ones was at the other one too. The granddaughter of one of the people that survived the Holocaust.
I think she was a filmmaker.
The daughter.
Yeah, right down.
The daughter was there. She was with me on the panel.
Yeah.
But the man of color who was the partner with the Jew, he went to the same grew up in New Orleans and went to the same high school. Of course, granted, 30 years apart, but still. Anyway, it was a fun story. So, Paul, I know you've got lots of things you want to talk about.
Just one little story about a congregation, Christian congregation in a Midwestern town, was served by the minister who went around on his bicycle. He rode his bicycle all over the place to meet with his parishioners, to comfort them, to listen to their problems, and to talk with them. And he was doing this very well until one day the bicycle wasn't there.
I think you have told the story twice now.
Do you want me to stop?
Last week and the week before. You've told the story a number of times. This is the one about the stole the bike and then he learned where he left the bike.
Okay, I give up.
No, right. I gavolt.
I don't have another one.
But you do have this sheet that you Xeroxed for us. Would you like to explain what that is?
Well, the total solar eclipse will be this afternoon. When you get home, you can watch it. And the message is, it tells you when it's going to be in Annapolis, but you've got to get your eyes protected.
You can't find glasses. I looked all over.
I happened, not that I would put my faith in this, but I did see a cute little clip this morning, or clip rather, where showing how to make one with a cereal box and some tin foil and everything, and how to use it, and the old-fashioned.
You know who MacGyver is? Have you ever heard of this character named MacGyver?
Yeah, but I mean, I think this probably in fact would be safe to do if you happen to have a cereal box.
I think if you looked at it for like 10 or 15 seconds, you'd be fine.
I think it's like if you look at it for 2 seconds, you might be fine, but more than that, you're probably taking risks.
The biggest problem.
You quickly look and then you look down.
Eyes.
Just glance at it.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is that, and this is really important to remember, is that because you think, well, I glance at the sun every day, why can't I glance at it? But also, as things get darker, your pupils are dilating. So a lot more light is going to be coming in at any given time. And so, yes, you do have to be a lot more careful.
So be careful. Thank you, Paul, for that. And Karen, we appreciate it. By the way, the Talmud speaks about an eclipse. Mm-hmm. And what's really interesting about the Talmud's description of the eclipse is they say it's a bad omen. Now, why? But they don't explain. You have to then go into the commentaries and stuff like that to understand why it's a bad omen. Do you have any ideas as to why you think it's a bad omen? By the way, it's very relevant and very modern.
Well, for quite a while, people were very superstitious, and they thought it was the end of the world and all kinds of terrible things would happen. Mm-hmm. But the Greek philosopher Thales, a long time ago, knew that it was a scientific, natural event, and he announced it. He spread the word. But before that, there was all kinds of superstition.
So you're saying that the reason why the Talmud said that it was a bad omen is because of people's superstitions.
Yes,
Possibly. That's not what that's not what a couple of the commentators that I read said, but that doesn't mean that that's not true.
Is it that God created the natural order in 7 days or 6 days, and he wouldn't throw it out of whack unless he was angry?
Fascinating. That's again, but now so far 2 for 2, but not the one that not the ones that I read what I read.
I don't remember real well, but I read something on my Jewish learning about that
Okay.
thing about why bad omen, and there were some passages that referred to effectively, and I've forgotten the precise language, but effectively, like if you're bad, we're going to take the light away and make you sit in the dark, and that was kind of
Fascinating. I don't disagree. Not what I read, but okay.
That was their interpretation.
What I'm
of
trying to
this.
also communicate is that just
Talmudic
because
thing.
I'm going to tell you what I read doesn't mean that I own truth. It just means that this is just what I read about it. But I'm just giving anyone else one chance.
You obviously read the wrong commentary.
Right, or the right ones that everyone else read. But since no one said the same thing yet, so it's because that things. So it's a little bit about what Paul had to say, but it's towards that. It's that the people around us would be so perplexed and so that they would look for people to blame. And that we as Jews, at least according to these commentaries that I read, would be scapegoats for what they couldn't understand.
you mean the Jews did it?
Yeah. Essentially, yes. The Jews did it, or there was something that we're responsible for. So it's just kind of, that's why, at least, I can't remember if it wasn't Rashi. I can't remember, but that's why they claimed that it was a bad omen. It's interesting to me. A word or two about Israel, and then we'll get started. As you might know, Israel is pulling out of Khan Yunis, and why we're pulling out of Khan Yunis, it's hard to know with certainty, but what I can say is it is coming immediately after a conversation that Netanyahu had with Biden. So it wouldn't be such a huge stretch to think that America has put pressure on Israel to start making some changes to the way that it's operating. Now that's kind of that is the scenario in which it's just kind of America's pressuring Israel, and that's why they're doing it. However, you could soften that a little bit, which I do probably believe is the case, which is that this is part of what is being discussed in Cairo regarding some sort of ceasefire, having to do with an hostage return, and this is one of the elements or stipulations to it, which is reasonable to imagine, and we'll see. Now, I must admit that us leaving Khan Yunis certainly does remove a bit of leverage that we probably have in any type of negotiation that's going on. If we leave ahead of time, then that's probably would have been one of the important kind of elements of a ceasefire, and we already did it. So I'm not so sure. It's very complicated. But
Biden knows more about military tactics than Israel, and the basis of that is what, Ukraine? That sanctions were going to keep Russia out of Ukraine? How did that work out for us?
Wait, say that again.
I said Biden is more of an expert
Obviously,
in military
sarcastically.
tactics than Israel.
Well, but
And this is in the aftermath of Ukraine getting out of Afghanistan, which was a disaster, failing to secure the southern border, driving Saudi Arabia into the hands of a relationship with Iran, China, and Russia. And we're going to give advice about how to wage war in Israel to
No,
Biden. I mean, that is what I call chutzpah.
except true, except you are suggesting that it's just Biden having these conversations alone. I don't believe that Biden is generating these thoughts independently of a large staff of military advisors and stuff like that.
It's driven by politics, Rabbi.
You think
know
so?
that. In Michigan, the Palestinians, Michigan is a
Yeah.
key swing
It's
state.
true.
This is a cynical effort to try and stay in power on the part of Biden. That's just the truth.
Do you don't think that there was that, because I've been saying this now for probably the last 3 or 4 weeks, that I felt like it was time for us to kind of turn our attention from, from the annihilation of Hamas to the retrieval of our
So we're going to
hostages.
snatch defeat from the jaws of victory.
Well,
That's what you're saying.
First of all, I'm agreeing with you that I believe that, as I was saying in the beginning, that I believe that it's an important leverage piece that we are letting go of, and more we're learning Khan Yunis is probably the most consequential location for Hamas. They talk about how the tunnel network beneath Khan Yunis just dwarfs that which was beneath Gaza City.
But take the idea if it's face value. They're saying it's time to regroup. A lot of these soldiers have been in Israel now, in Gaza rather, for 4 months straight. They need a break. And Israel needs to prepare to go into Rafah. So that takes repositioning, re-outfitting, regrouping.
So what you're suggesting was that this decision by Netanyahu had nothing to do with America?
I don't think it did.
All right. Possible.
Coincidentally.
Yeah. I hope you're right.
Or, because diplomatically, these things always go on in the background. A deal has already been cut for this meeting again of all the parties to try to get a ceasefire, and as part of that, Israel's agreed.
I don't.
Okay, we're going to pull out of
There won't be a
here, but
ceasefire.
we get all the.
I
No,
don't.
there'll never be a ceasefire.
I'll tell you no, but
we get all the we get the terror, we get the hostages
it's not
back.
going to happen.
But then 2 weeks from now, if Israel wants to go bomb because there's a commander in front of a parade, they're going to do that.
No, but the point is that Hamas gains nothing by giving up the hostages, because in 6 weeks, let's say the ceasefire is in 6 weeks, all bets are off after 6 weeks. It's going to be open season on Rafah, and it's a matter of time. Hamas will be finished. So what's the incentive for them to agree to a 6 week ceasefire? They're just postponing the inevitable.
Optics. It's important.
It's optics.
But you act as if that's not significant. I think it's become
Optics
exceedingly
for
significant.
Israel it is, but not for Hamas.
No, of course
Hamas
not.
doesn't
But
care.
Hamas has got pressure too. And guys are saying, you think there's going to be money coming back in to rebuild this? You guys got a lot of
They
problems.
don't care about that.
You
The only thing they
well,
care
we'll
about
see.
is financial support from Iran. And Iran, since we stopped enforcing sanctions, has all the money in the world to finance Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, the Syrians. That's what we're dealing with. Iran is behind
Oh,
this.
absolutely. There's not even an
Right.
issue about that.
So just to make sure I'm understanding, because this is helpful, are you suggesting that that this was a strategic decision by Israel to leave Khan Yunis,
Yeah.
and in doing so, and it's maybe possibly plausibly with the purpose of just strengthening and kind of and just retooling a little bit before.
And it's a window of opportunity because they want to get aid into Gaza now.
Right.
So Israel is kind of lightening up a little bit, opening up the 2 additional crossings, allowing trucks are now pouring into Gaza with food aid, things like that.
Dave, I noticed you seemed to be, when I mentioned it at first, felt like it was terrible for Israel to be leaving Khan Yunis. Do you agree with that? That's what you kind of like, you gave me that sense when I mentioned it.
Well, the thing that bothers me is there's 5 Americans among the hostages, and I don't see anybody in our government doing anything vocally to get those 5 Americans back.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, because no one knows where they are or how to find them, or even if
And
they're
they
alive.
send the special forces in to find them.
Yeah, well, then that would be boots on the ground, which
Biden's deadly afraid of.
well, because no one wants boots on the ground, right? Or, I mean, maybe the Jewish community wants to see boots on the ground there, but I don't think anyone really wants to see boots on the ground in Gaza, American soldiers. But
I don't see any great effort to get that journalist that's in Russia released, and he's Jewish too. So I think there's a lot of anti-Semitism in the American government right now.
May or may not be true, but you can't put this on Biden. He's not powerful enough to be able to get hostages, U.S. hostages out. Come on, realistically, it's not going to happen.
But all right, so it's nonetheless and Bob was mentioning, and it's true that the demonstrations are returning to Israel and Tel Aviv with respect to the anti-Netanyahu kind of demonstrations. Though I participated in numerous demonstrations over the last year and a half, I will also say that I did not, when I was there in December, they were starting the demonstrations again, and though I had been in those very demonstrations, for the year prior, on, again, numerous occasions, I didn't feel comfortable going and participating in an anti-Netanyahu demonstration when I was there. I don't think I would participate in it today, but I objected to it back then, and now I just would say I'm just not quite knowing. It's like a very tenuous situation, and I don't know if I would want to participate in a demonstration today, even though I was happily doing so last year. And once again, to say that I felt uncomfortable with them even occurring when I was there in December, I no longer feel uncomfortable with them occurring, but I just wouldn't participate in them. Just because.
So Rabbi, I have a view, which I agree with the earlier speaker about what's going on, but I think most of the hostages are dead. Either that or they've had limbs amputated. And I think most of the childbearing women are pregnant. And so releasing hostages,
Boy, can you
that's the only thing they have. I'm either realistic or cynical, and I think I'm realistic.
I think they want to have. I think these hostages. I think I've said this too, and I really on a number of occasions I really believe it. It's like there's an irony, which is that Hamas became the great protectors of the hostages, because had they not, then they would have been killed by the masses. But Hamas knew that keeping them alive is much more important than if they're dead. Then they have very little leverage in this. But the hostages have been part of.
If it's known that they're dead.
Yeah, they just recovered the body of a hostage who had been shot while he was in captivity, not one that was dead and brought back to Hamas.
Right, that happened that was like a week or two, but you're right, I remember that too. So yeah, this is, it's.
And I wish they'd stop talking about there are too many dead people in Gaza. There are 30,000 dead. What would be an acceptable number? 15,000? It begs the question, what is an acceptable number of dead people in Gaza?
Well, I think the question is,
we're grasping at straws.
First of all, I understand exactly what you're saying, and there's a part of me that feels very much the same way that you do, and at the same time, there's also a part of me which feels as if I think what we're seeing now is kind of. I think, look, the killing of those 7 people in the World Central Kitchen was a terrible black eye. A terrible, terrible black eye. First of all, not only does it just look bad, and the optics, which I do believe are important, but it's just also just a terrible misstep. I mean, what a huge mistake that Israel made. I mean, and I do believe it was a mistake. I certainly don't believe it was deliberate, but
they fessed up to it right away.
And they fired them.
Fired people.
They
No,
fired
The
them.
United States, when it hit a bunch of innocents in Afghanistan when they were pulling out, and they still haven't done anything about the people that were
All right,
responsible for it. So the
They've been
United
promoted,
States,
most of them.
huh?
They've been promoted,
So,
most of them.
Yeah.
okay, so good for us for owning up to it, and I do agree that we should have owned up to it immediately, but at the same time, shame on us for doing it in the first place. And again, it was a mistake, but look, you gotta be, you can't just, that was a big error, because it's not like, that these people were cooking meals underneath in the tunnels of the hospital. It's not like they were driving in a car that was well marked on a street in a convoy, which presumably, and I think they had communicated and again, that's unclear to me how much it was communicated where, but the point is still, it was a marked car on the streets in the daylight, and so I think it was daylight. Was it not daylight?
Nighttime.
Nighttime? Oh, that's a little
Nighttime, and the markings of the World Central Kitchen, which were on the
top roof of the car.
roofs of the car, I don't think they were like
Illuminated.
neon or,
Oh,
they may not
reflective,
have
right?
been, yeah, they may not have been reflective.
All
I'm
right.
not sure.
Well,
But
that's
the
a little bit better,
yeah, the larger issue here to me, from what I've been reading, is, and this is what concerns me terribly, is the image of the state of Israel, not only in America, but around the world, but especially in America. This is an existential problem for the state of Israel, because if you look at the political ramifications all throughout America, I mean,
it's losing support. Right.
Republican side, Democratic side, doesn't matter what side you're on, Israel's not coming across well. And you could get a Congress or an administration that backs off of its support of the state of Israel to a very great degree, and that will leave Israel fairly isolated in the world.
And vulnerable.
And vulnerable, because we are Israel's backstop.
Yep.
And if this situation does not turn around.
When has she not been?
Sorry?
When has she not been isolated and vulnerable, Israel?
We've always
When?
had Israel's back
No,
since
no,
1948.
Okay, but we
It's
still have
always
their
been,
back.
it's always been
We still have
isolated,
their back.
but nobody in the world
But let me
would
just say what
try
I
to
want to
attack
say.
Israel
Okay.
without knowing that we had their back. Okay?
Right.
No one in the world. And who supplied Israel with
Okay.
the arms and the jets and
They
the
don't have the jets yet.
No. Over years, we've been
over the years,
right.
all the jets that we used against Egypt and against Jordan, I think it was, in the '68 war. All of those weapons, a lot of them, most of them came from us.
And what enabled
And-
Hamas?
Sorry?
What enabled Hamas? Iran. And who financed Iran? The United States.
We did.
We did.
Yes.
We stopped enforcing sanctions. We unfroze assets. We handed them $8 billion at one point. We thought nice gets nice. If we're nice to them, they'll be nice to us. Please, this all goes back to not enforce. They're rolling in money. They had no money 4 years ago. The sanctions were very tough. And we made it clear to people who traded with them, you can't trade with us.
Wait, but hold on. Just make sure I understand this. So Netanyahu, and for that matter, and I don't mean to politicize this, but Netanyahu and the Republicans were talking about what a terrible deal it was, and that they needed to, and Trump said the first thing I'm going to do is end the Iran deal, which is going to stop the sanctions. So are we not? Is this?
Who said that?
Trump, didn't he say, like, I'm going to end these sanctions
that
that
before, when he- in
Obama
2016?
created?
No,
Prior?
he said he was going to end the JCPOA. He imposed sanctions on Iran,
I
Rabbi.
mean, I don't know.
Very tough sanctions.
It was,
We had
it's
them
the
in- we
worst
had-
deal in the world.
Hopefully, we had them in a box.
Right, but this was all Trump says it's the worst deal in the world. Yeah.
We need to stop this because it's getting political.
It's true.
in the room.
You're right. All right, so we can stop. But my point is that I was under the impression that those sanctions were established by Obama.
Oh my God.
No?
They
No,
weren't.
no.
What was the deal that they're talking about?
JCPOA.
What's that?
JCPOA.
No,
It
it
was
was,
the deal that we had with Iran, that eventually, that we would trade with them, eventually they would be able to produce a nuclear weapon.
right, we were sanctioning them and we,
No, but we said, we're gonna trade with you, and we're gonna allow you to sell oil.
all right.
And
All right, so let's, it's just so, because I don't want, it's like, let's,
well, it's political, but everybody at this table is listen, it's very rare that I speak about things like this.
right.
And I'm obviously conservative, and I have a different point of view. But when I have a different point of view, or somebody has a different point of view, the majority of people here, it's not acceptable suddenly to talk
Oh,
about it.
no,
I don't
Arthur,
think
we
so.
just, we very pointedly don't talk American politics in this room.
Right, and I just brought it up
reason.
unfortunately, and I shouldn't
I
have.
absolutely respect your right to have your opinion and would love to talk to you outside of the room. But we
But
don't want to
this,
get
I don't
into
consider this to be
fisticuffs.
politics. I just don't.
No, but Arthur,
Well, it is,
I'm very
because my
concerned
view is
about,
different, I mean, completely of the facts
Arthur,
is different from yours.
I have this feeling that Israel has a submarine off the coast of Iran with a nuclear weapon on it, and if things get too bad, that nuclear weapon's gonna get used on Iran.
I don't know does Israel have nuclear subs?
They don't have nuclear subs, but they have subs that can carry,
Well, it's
they
the
can
very
shoot
thing
nuclear
people, it's the very
bombs.
thing people in Israel right now, we heard this yesterday from my sister-in-law, the very thing that Israelis are talking about privately is what do we have to do if we're attacked by Iran to protect the state of Israel? And the word nuclear comes up more and more.
Yep, you're
And
right, I've heard
Israel
that
right
too.
now is bracing for an attack from Iran.
Yep, that's true.
why do you think they
Good.
attacked that embassy building, was an embassy building in, was it Damascus? Yeah. Why
So,
do you think they did
can I-
that? I think they wanted to take those guys out.
Yeah, look,
can I add
how about we
something about?
give this 3 more minutes and then we'll move on to Torah. Go ahead.
Something about U.S. universities. The Times of Israel a couple of weeks ago had an article reporting a 2022 story of the billions of dollars that Qatar gives to U.S. universities. Carnegie Mellon got $301 million between 20 and 23. Virginia Commonwealth got $125 million. Cornell University got $1.5 billion. So they gave billions and billions of dollars to U.S. universities.
Yeah, I know, and that's been, and they're, and establishing chairs of, anti-Zionism studies
Right.
in these various colleges, which is really strikingly horrendous. Let's move on, and I apologize if I contributed to any of this because was not my intention. And the truth is that I struggle with this because, like, I really am. I'm not. This is a struggle for me because I see what's going on as existentially problematic. And when Arthur said that he spoke with his sister-in-law about, and they're bringing up more and more the word nuclear, yeah, I'm hearing that too. And I'm hearing also that Israel right now went on a high alert status,
Yeah.
which is, and
People are being asked to have like at least 3 days of food in their house. Oh, it's either 3 days or 3 months. I forget now. But let's say it's 3 days. In other words, get ready.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a real concern. And I don't think, unfortunately, that the Iron Dome can intercept a nuclear missile coming from Iran.
It would just
And if
scatter.
1,000 much better missiles are fired from Hezbollah in Lebanon.
We don't have, right,
I'm not sure the Iron Dome was gonna stop all of those.
no way.
heading
It's,
for
But I'm not
Haifa
talking
and
about a
Tel Aviv.
nuclear weapon from Iran. I'm talking about Israel
yeah,
preparing
yeah.
to drop a nuclear device
oh, wow.
on Tehran.
Wow. I did not hear that. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
That's what
well,
I
that's,
heard.
that wouldn't surprise, I mean, it's like, if they're not talking about that and thinking about
They
that, that
are.
wouldn't surprise me.
It's a good rumor to get out anyway.
It's true. It's a very good rumor to get out, whether it's true or not.
I'm just reporting it's people,
Right.
people in Israel are talking about.
But what I'm
it.
saying though is that I'm also hearing about how Israel itself is concerned and worried about what, I mean, look, as it should be. I mean, because at least now there's, it's up until now, it's been threats by Iran. So why, at least maybe Israel throws a threat or two out there, can't hurt. All right, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher k'shanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praise you, Adonai our God, commanding us to busy ourselves in the words of Torah.
Amen.
Okay, so we're on chapter 4, verse 1, which is on page 118. And so we, last week and the week before, we were talking about, Moses meeting with God at the burning bush. And God, saying to Moses, he wants Moses to be the leader of our people. And Moses is kind of needy for explanations and reassurances and signs. And chapter 4 continues with these signs and reassurances that God is going to provide for Moses. So, yeah.
If you will permit me, I'd like to go back a little bit to the section before section 4, where it is said that I will dispose the Egyptians favorably toward this people, so they will when you go, you will not go away empty-handed. Each woman shall borrow from her neighbor. In other words, that story, that the jewels and such. And I want to say that it seems to me this is very unrealistic. If any of you have had any servants, would you say, take the jewelry and go to Burning Man Festival in Nevada, or take them and go to Lollapalooza for 3 days? No, that's not the way it happened. What happened is something of the sort that happened that I experienced when I was 6 years old in Hungary. The angel of death that was passing through was the battle, the Russians coming in, the battle against the Nazis. And I was in a small town, and the Russians were coming in. All the homes were ransacked and devastated. There were possessions all around, scattered. The people had fled. And I remember going, and because my mother and I were on charity, we were getting food once a day. And I remember going with the Russian soldiers, and I wanted to get a purse, because my mother didn't have a purse. And I had this very nice purse, and somehow a Russian soldier took it from me. They treated me all right. What I'm saying is that this here was a terrible catastrophe, and it's not that these possessions, the people were giving them away. And so here is the prelude to the Passover story, is this terrible catastrophe that affected all of Egypt.
Well, so at minimum, though, what I'm hearing from that story is that this is kind of like how things go.
Yes.
But also what I'm hearing from that story is, though, that it wasn't you and your mom looting, it was the Russian army.
Oh, my mother didn't know anything about it.
No, but
she didn't know anything. I was this urchin that was going around.
Right. What I'm saying, though, is it's only only a people who are in power can do that, not a people who are in dire straits can do that.
When things are destroyed either by earthquake or by war or by the angel of death, which is what we're going to talk about in terms of Passover, then all the possessions are open and people take what's there, and So this is sort of a prelude to the Passover story, which we're going to be reading over the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, and this is what the Palestinians did when the border was opened by Hamas. They came in and took everything they could take.
Yes, right.
So Jimmy, you're suggesting not so much
What
that
page?
they went and said,
118.
hey, Sally, give me this, but Sally was gone, so they went in and took her stuff.
And of course, part of this, the angel of death, was the earthquake, which destroyed
Yeah.
a lot. So, yes.
Yeah, there's, I mean, look,
What
But
is
it
the
was not
exact,
that the Egyptians said, take these
Yeah,
things
yeah.
and go and we want you to take these jewels,
But you're
go and
not
worship
comparing-
God in
you're
the
What
not
the
desert.
comparing-
Palestinians did was looting.
Right.
But
This is
you're not
not looting.
comparing what happened here, right, to what the Russians did to the Hungarians, are you?
The Russians certainly were responsible for the destruction. Yes, they were.
So you are comparing the
Oh,
two.
yes, indeed.
So the Jews were guilty, you're saying, of taking things that didn't belong to them?
yes,
Hebrews.
Yes.
yes,
We're
that I would
guilty
say
I
too.
am saying
Of taking
that,
things
yes.
that didn't belong.
I would say that too.
Well,
In Egypt,
if it's
yes,
literature,
well,
you gotta have something to melt. When Moses is up on Mount Sinai.
Right,
So
no,
if the
how do they come up
story
with the calf?
Comes from ancient literature and tell down stories and
Yeah.
oral history, then you gotta have, you know.
Right, no, golden calf, you need to have stuff to be able to make it into a golden calf. Where did we get that stuff if we were slaves? Oh, because we borrowed it from our neighbors. Now,
There had been 290 years of bondage, you know that.
so therefore,
Yes.
less time for, less accumulation of wealth.
But there was a time that they were very wealthy. You know, it says, there was a later pharaoh and forgot about all the history of foretelling the drought and saving all the Egyptians, and they built up wealth and they had land. So they could have had a store of value that 3 or 4 generations later, they still had as they were oppressed. And
Or,
the pharaohs forgot about the great thing they had done.
or maybe they were just the more powerful group. Because maybe, again, as I have said probably about a dozen times here, maybe it wasn't a bunch of slaves that left, but rather people that had actual power. And that I
I don't
believe,
understand that. They were slaves.
okay, no,
Amudim hayinu.
yes, that is what it says, for sure. I'm just saying that maybe that element of the story is not a historically factual.
Yeah, well, that goes to the point I've made before, maybe, is that a myth is considered to be not something that's not true. But from the Greek word mythos means that a story with a purpose. If the story may not be literally true, but the purpose is what matters.
Okay, so,
The purpose is, in the case of Genesis, the purpose was to give people some kind of an answer to all these things that were happening in the sky with us.
no, we understand what you're talking about, but I'm saying, what do you say, how are you applying that to this?
I don't know.
Gotcha. So, yeah, sure, Eleanor, go ahead.
Okay. Something I read once said that the Jews were not involved in the making of the pyramids, but they were involved in artisan work with jewels for the pyramids. So if that was the case, they had been given jewels to do their crafts, and therefore some of the Jews would have had these jewels to then give away.
Okay, that's a good thought, no question. I'm just saying that,
what is the word borrowed in Hebrew?
right, it's not borrowed, that's the translation, but I'll tell you.
What would you translate?
Well, first of all,
it as,
right, it was
what can it be translated
So
as?
if we're looking at,
Because borrowed implies that someone is giving it to you willingly.
yeah, it's asked, Sha'ala Isha Mishkananta.
Well,
So
what line are you on?
I'm looking at 22. It's asked, each woman asked of her neighbor.
Okay.
Look,
So that implies consent. it implies consent.
Correct. But we know,
We are saying
but we know
that
there's an
nobody's
absurdity.
gonna give up,
Right, there's an
It's not a
absurdity
cup
to
of sugar.
consent, right? It's like, right, it's not a cup of sugar.
But
Correct.
this was part of the prophecy, right? And God decreed that you will serve as slaves, you'll be freed, and when you leave, you will leave with riches and gold and things of value from the
Yeah.
Egyptians. It's just part of the prophet. So this sentence or two is needed to be consistent with that narrative.
Well, why? You could, because it says it again later that we borrowed things from our, the gold and silver from our, or asked of things of our gold and silver.
I think the Torah is making the point that it actually happened. So the prophecy now is beginning to manifest itself.
I see. So what you're saying is that they mentioned it again, so to make the prophecy, as opposed to they created this.
To make the narrative coherent.
I see. Well, but it could have worked without.
Yeah.
The second one wouldn't have worked. I mean, excuse me. They couldn't have included this one here and not included the second one, but they could have done the second one without the first one.
The other thing that I have a question about is, or not question, my viewpoint is they used women, each woman.
Right, we talked about
rather
this.
than-
Right, yeah. About why just women?
Clarifying, because women are less threatening at this time in life.
Yeah.
It's when you go in, when a woman comes to your door to ask her neighbor, can you give me whatever? She is
More convincing, more persuasive.
Well, less threatening than, if I came to the door, or if any of you men came to the door, you would have a more physical threat.
Yeah, agreed.
Ivan Ezra has a comment on
Okay.
this.
What does he say?
And I don't read Rashi as much anymore because you said he's way out there. Ivan is more just interpreting.
Right. Well,
He says, Scripture mentions females here because women are more in the habit of asking their neighbors for jewelry of gold and silver to put on the necks of their sons and daughters. They are likewise in the habit of asking for earrings, nose rings, bracelets, crescents, and anklets. This is the contemporary custom. Now he's writing in 1200.
Yep.
This is a contemporary custom in Muslim countries.
Yeah.
However, the inhabitants of the land of the uncircumcised do not act in this manner. Scripture similarly speaks of a sorceress, as women are more involved in witchcraft than men. So I don't know where he goes there.
By the way, Ibn Ezra was living in Spain during the Christian period, but he certainly knew clearly how much better it was during the Muslim period of Spain.
Yeah.
All that. Look, thank you. Shall we go? Can we move forward? Let's do it. Moses spoke up and said, this is verse 1, chapter 4, page 118. Moses spoke up and said, what if they do not believe me and do not listen to me, but say, the Lord did not appear to you? The Lord said to him, what is in your hand? And he replied, a rod. All right, well, let's read a little more. He said, cast it on the ground. He cast it on the ground and it became a snake. And Moses recoiled from it. So, certainly, let's start here. I think we know about the asps in Egypt and how they have kind of I don't want to say holier, but kind of like almost
Mystical.
Yeah, thank you. That's the word. Mystical kind of.
What's the word?
Asps.
Oh,
That's cobra.
Right, cobras, but I think asps can be more than just cobras. But snakes of all have a mystical kind of a connotation to them, and so but there also are various stories or Egyptian narratives that talk about snakes and the control of snakes and snakes kind of. I was looking at one that talked about how that oftentimes in Egypt, what they would do both to alligators and to snakes is that they would mesmerize them or hypnotize them so that they became more stiff. And so they weren't able to turn a staff into a snake, but they were able to turn a snake into something staff-like, right? So, and the reason why it was mentioned was because what this archaeological or at least statement was saying was that God was going the opposite way. Everyone was able to do it, not everyone, but there were sorcerers who were able to make the snake like a staff, but no one could make the staff a snake.
I saw this actually when I was visiting Northern Africa. I saw a snake charmer and with a cobra. And he did something, and the cobra then just stayed still.
Right.
Rose up, and it stayed still.
Right.
So that's an actual event.
Right. Yeah. Now, what's interesting also here is that we in our modern world, we're aware of. I know I personally have been working on this for me personally. Like, we have a fear of snakes, more so than other animals, right? And so look, a dog could rip you to shreds, but no one has some people are afraid of dogs, but no, typically, we don't assume a stance of terror from dogs unless we're told this dog is dangerous, don't get near it. Then we'd say, all right, we'll stay away from it. But a snake, no one just walks up and makes assumptions that the snake is friendly until otherwise.
Well, my experience was when I was walking down the mountain, I heard a rattle.
Right.
I turned around and went the other way.
Correct. So my point though is that we somehow have this almost ingrained DNA fear of snakes, which is just kind of.
Well, that goes back to Eden.
It could, yeah.
But it's true. There's a book called The Wild Life of Our Bodies, and it's really interesting. It's all about human interaction, and one of the chapters is on this topic, and humans have it, as do the primates that live in continents and places where there's poisonous snakes. Where there are non-poisonous snakes, like Hawaii and maybe Madagascar. I don't know where the other places are. The primates don't have any fear, but in other places, the animals run from snakes, and he talks about how humans evolved with this too. So if you're walking in your yard and you see your garden hose, your brain will see snake and you step back. And it's a true human condition.
But that's correct. But my point though was that I would have said this is something that we have learned over time. Like that's and I don't want to say it's modern, but I want to say that it's that 200 years ago or 150 years ago, people were not quite as freaked out by snakes maybe as we are today. But the answer is no. It sounds to me like they were just as freaked out back then as we are now. And this is kind of interesting.
The Garden of Eden story tells us about what the snake had to do with them getting kicked out of the Garden of Eden.
Right. So it says, and now I think what's also interesting is that it's the staff here that we're talking about, which in 5 Moses minutes ago was just this kind of tool for just handling a flock. And now it's turned into kind of this magical tool for handling a much bigger flock, which is going to be the Israelites. Because it's becoming now a divine object. It's not just, he's kind of seeing that staff as having way more significance than just this little thing that he could whack against a stone or a tree and it would kind of help get his sheep moving in the correct direction. but rather now it's kind of becoming a much, much huger piece of a tool or piece of equipment. So God says, cast it on the ground. He cast it on the ground and it became a snake. Oh, I just read that. And Moses recoiled from it. Then the Lord said to Moses, put out your hand and grasp it by the tail. He put out his hand and seized it, and it became a rod in his hand. So I've read a fair number of comments on this that all say something which I actually know to be the opposite. So they all say that God tells Moses to reach and grab it by the tail because they say that's the most dangerous place to grab a snake. Right, that you're supposed to grab it behind its head, right? Now, granted, yeah, if you can get it behind its head, that's that, and then you're holding it just at its, essentially its neck, then, right, that snake is unable to bite you. But really, with the exception of, I think, the black mamba, which is unusually kind of muscular, that most snakes, if you grab it by its tail, they're helpless. You don't want to be grabbing a rattlesnake by its tail, obviously, but even a king cobra, because what you're doing is, because they don't have the strength to be able in midair to turn itself, they need the full body to be able to propel itself. And so actually grabbing by the tail is a wise way of grabbing it. But if you can't just hold it there on the ground by the tail, you have to lift it up. But once you lift it up off the ground by the tail, half of its body, let's say, being off the ground, then you're relatively safe. But being a person who's terrified of snakes, I've learned this stuff. I have now officially, by the way, held a snake one time. It was a very important move on my part. Because I was so scared of them. And I was watching all these little kids holding it. And I'm thinking, why is it that the 7-year-old can hold it, but I can't? What's wrong with me? And so I said, I'm going to do it. And I was trembling, but I held it. Okay. Put out your hand, grasp it by the tail. He put out his hand and seized it, and it became a rod in his hand. So it returns back to its original makeup. That they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob did appear to you. So what God, I think, is trying to say is, you can count on this. Every time you throw that staff on the ground, it's going to turn into a snake. Every time you reach for it, it's going to, because you're going to need to have this trick up your sleeve, because if they don't believe you, this is going to be a good one for you. The second one God taught was, pick a card, any card.
I just had visions of.
Don't show it to me.
I had visions of Moses going and wanting to sit down and have a bite to eat, and he lays down the staff.
All of a sudden flew out.
So he had to spend his life holding on.
That's true. It's like, keep it upright, Moses. But really, I think the card tricks is probably would be a great way of proving things to you. Anyway, the Lord saw, okay, next one, I want you to take that woman and saw her in half and then put it back together and she's all. Okay, the Lord said to him further, put your hand into your bosom. He put his hand into his bosom, and when he took it out, his hand was encrusted with snowy scales. Oigavalt. So
scales are snake-like. So here we have another snake image, if that's truly what they're saying.
Well, it's kind of what they're saying.
Okay.
When they say scales, they're referring to dry skin leprosy. Correct. Okay. Now, what I love about this is that this is one of those cases in which the Hebrew has given way to English. And I'll show you what I mean. So the Hebrew is...
Where are you?
Verse 6 of the Hebrew.
And he said...
Yeah, but I'm just gonna go for it. So I'll start halfway through. Vayavo yado b'cheko. So he put his hand onto his chest or bosom. V'yotzia v'hine yado, and he took it out, and behold, his hand, mitzoraat kasheleg. Okay, so the hand was, I'm going to give you the first time we start in Hebrew. His hand was mitzoraat, and then he says, and then it says kasheleg, and that means just like snow. So he was, again, I know I'm saying a Hebrew word, mitzoraat, like snow. So now, what I'm going to do is help you come up with hold on, I'm going to help you come up with the translation of mitzoraat without telling you, and I think you're going to get it. So,
Egypt.
No, not Mitzrayim, but that's a good one. Mitzoraat. So, I personally have a medical condition. So now HIPAA be damned. I have a medical condition. I see a dermatologist for it, in which on my elbow right here, on my knee, I have
arthritis. It's
psoriasis.
psoriasis, right? My dad had it.
Now, psoriasis, and now think about the Hebrew word again. It says mitzoraat, but the word is saraat. Saraat, psoriasis, it is the same word. God gave, well, okay, psoriasis is, we have made into a much more specific scientific term. But for them, psoriasis was essentially just the dried, white, dead skin scales that kind of come over on your body that are, and so now when I say snowy scales, what they're talking about is a version of psoriasis. Whether it's actually psoriasis or not, it's a version of it.
Well, I get this on my old hand. My old hand is all dried, skin is dried out,
right.
And I have to put some lotion on it.
And if it was your mama's lotion, it would be mama lotion.
Mama lotion, very good.
Thank you very much, Jim.
But isn't this sarat? What in Leviticus there are all kinds of things, have people.
We have a whole Torah portion called Tazria, and then a second one called Mitzora, which is all about skin disease and leprosy, skin disease. My point is only to say that I was just trying to help you kind of understand the word better. Then now you know what is Mitzoraat Kasheleg, something like snow. It's referring to there was, look like.
So next week if Paul comes into class with a rod in his hand, we need to all be better.
I've got a rod, but I can't change its shape.
That's right. All right. So it goes back, and he said, God, that's God, of course, put your hand back into your bosom. He put his hand back into his bosom, and when he took it out of his bosom, there it was again like the rest of his body. So that's a pretty good one. It's like, boom, I've got psoriasis. Boom, I don't. Right? That's, that's just basically healing from. But and I do want to also point out, which is that that type of ailment was one of the mysteries, because you weren't, like if you were sick, you were running a fever, and people saw that there was, that people saw that there was illness in terms of running a temperature, but oftentimes, like if you had psoriasis or some sort of skin, it's not that you acted sick, you just looked it, and so this type of disease was one of the most feared diseases because it was purely punishment. And no one ever had psoriasis or some sort of skin disease only for it to go away moments later. You had that skin disease that you knew you were kind of stuck with it for a while, and you could be a pariah too. And so therefore so the fact that he pulled out his hand and it was scaly was not only significant, but also terrifying.
Well, the New Testament has a lot with Jesus caring for those with leprosy because they were outcast and
Right.
couldn't live in the city.
That's right.
It was deemed contagious and nobody but.
Well, and that's because the Torah talks about how you treat a person with leprosy or with, tzaraat, and that was you isolate them.
But it didn't work.
Right. It didn't work, and what happened was sometimes it just went away on its own, and if it did.
No, but I mean, it didn't convince Pharaoh of anything.
Oh, right. That didn't work.
I mean,
but then again, I don't think Moses ever uses this one before Pharaoh.
But none of these parlor tricks.
Yeah, the staff. The staff.
Yeah,
that did convince.
It didn't convince him, but he used it.
He used it, but it didn't. And changing even water to wine or wine to whatever that was.
That was Jesus.
All these were parlor tricks, but none of them were
to blood, but not wine.
We ended up with 10 plagues, and those didn't even work until we got to the killing of the firstborn.
That's true, except for the fact that it's because God didn't let them work. I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart.
Yeah.
You don't know about that?
I know all about that, but that's not the interpretation I would.
God hardened Pharaoh's heart, so Pharaoh would not let them go, so God could continue to demonstrate plagues, to demonstrate God's might for the sake of, to convince the Israelites when they're leaving that God was in fact all that.
Can I respond with a slightly different spin? And that is that the rabbis would say, the Orthodox, that because Pharaoh was predisposed not to complying, therefore God hardened his heart. In other words, he was not ready to let the Hebrews go. He was predisposed not to do that. And therefore God said, listen, if you're not gonna do what you need to do and comply with my demands, then I'm gonna harden your heart. It's gonna be even easier for you to do what you want to do. In other words, you're gonna dig a deeper hole for yourself, leading to the killing of the firstborn. It's not that dissimilar from what you're saying, but it's a slightly different.
So God wanted the Pharaoh.
No, God wanted the Pharaoh to comply
on the first plague.
On the first place, to let the people go, but he didn't. And God basically got to the point where he said, listen, if you're going to be like this and you are committed to really not complying with my demands, I'll show you. And I will harden your heart and make it easier, in effect, for you to do what you're doing and to dig a deeper hole.
All right, so
does that make sense? I don't know.
It makes sense. I'm not so sure. Like I that was hard. Like that, what that sounds like to me sounds like. And again, I'm not saying I'm saying what that sounds like. God, because you got to assume that God. You see, Pharaoh's predisposed to not let him go. I mean, I'd like to think that God can change Pharaoh's mind, right?
Free will.
Well, free will to a degree, only because we know that if God predicted us borrowing stuff from, maybe that we didn't have as much free will as we thought we did. But my point though is that it suggests that God, which is unacceptable, at least what I would think to the rabbis, was that God wasn't capable of changing Pharaoh's mind, and so therefore, instead of, again, which is unacceptable. So instead of having Pharaoh accept the first plague, God hardens Pharaoh's heart because it's like God was hedging God's bets, because if God's unable to convince Pharaoh on plague one.
The hardening didn't occur until after he failed to comply after the first plague. And then I think by the second or third or fourth plague, you hear about God hardening his heart.
I have to. We'll get there because I can't remember the order of things. But we'll see.
I'm a little bit surprised at all this discussion about what God is thinking about. How can you know what this divine creature is thinking about, and why would God even interfere to all these
I don't
All
think
these details.
I don't think that neither I nor Arthur are suggesting that we know what God was thinking. I think Arthur was simply communicating what he has learned in the past as to the reason why there were 10 plagues and why God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And I was not saying that Arthur, he was communicating that, and I was saying I struggle with that because it feels like this, but not saying that I would suggest that I knew what God was thinking. Rather, I was just kind of saying that's a complicated response because this would be my response to that. So I don't think I don't think we, maybe, maybe, I don't think we were necessarily
The
saying.
answer to Paul is we believe there are inspired rabbis who have insights that the average person doesn't have about what God was thinking. Nobody knows what God was thinking, but they have or purport to have insights into what God was thinking.
Based upon the Torah itself.
Based on the Torah itself.
Right, so okay, so let's, so his hand returns, so verse 8, and if they do not believe you or pay heed to the first sign, they will believe the second. In other words, what he's saying is, if they don't buy into the whole staff snake trick, they'll certainly buy the whole leprosy healed. Psoriasis healed. Correct. And it's and if they are not convinced by both these signs and still do not heed you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on dry land, and the water that you take from the Nile, will turn to blood on dry ground. And so it's like almost like a precursor to the first plague, because it's different. But he's saying like almost like give a little taste of what that first plague is going to be like by putting some of this water on dry ground and having it just magically turn to blood. And the water that you take from the Nile will turn to blood on dry. Okay. So what I think is kind of interesting, and I wrote down a note or something, a couple of notes to myself, is just how much blood plays into the story.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I can think of 4 examples of blood playing into the story. One of which we're going to get to probably next week, because it's about 15 verses from now. But there's the one here, obviously. There is, of course, the first plague. There is going to be a story which is going to be somewhat shocking and surprising and also mystifying, because it's universally, it's very hard to, no one knows why this story appears, but in 15 verses we're going to see that God tries to kill Moses. It's inexplicable, right? Well, I mean, some rabbis say
He wasn't circumcised.
Okay, yes, that's what people argue, but it's still inexplicable.
He didn't circumcise his son.
Yes.
His son.
Right, his son. So, although some claim that Moses himself, although I don't buy that, but so that's a third, because he circumcised his kid and they wipe some blood on Moses. And then the fourth one is, of course, the blood on the doorposts after, as part of the 10th plague. My point is that it is kind of, there are the 4 parts of this narrative within just a couple chapters of each other, in which blood plays a significant part in the story.
And later in the Torah, when animals are slaughtered as a sacrifice, right? The blood is sprinkled around the altar.
Yeah.
Right, but also the priests put some blood on their earlobes, I think. And look, what I know is that I just gave you 4 examples, but 2 of the examples are blood and the river Nile. Now, and I think that there's probably some meaning in that. which is that, the Nile does serve as the life of Egypt. And so when you kind of compromise the Nile, at least on two, you are doing a very,
It's the lifeblood.
right, ironically, it's the lifeblood.
And
Yeah.
the fifth one is the Red Sea, which people who have been to Iraq and such, I'm told this doesn't look red at all.
No, it's not red.
But it's called the Red Sea.
It is called the Red Sea, but I think it's because the mountains that are, there were the mountains of Edom, which were the Edomites, which were on the Jordanian side, and I think that maybe it kind
I
of
think
takes
it
its
was
name
the
from.
Sea of Reeds got morphed into the.
Well, no, right. Well, but no, I was going to there in a second. But I think it's the Sea of Reeds, which is the one that we went through, not the Red Sea, because we refer to it as Yam Suf, which is Sea of Reeds.
So,
I thought the word reeds got maybe morphed into.
Perhaps,
Chris,
yeah.
But Arthur, what the rabbis,
Yes.
whom you quote, is what they come up with is called the midrash.
The folklore, yeah.
Well,
Yeah, so
or-
it's not the truth. They just come up with this in their intelligent, serious discussions, and they disagree with each other also.
Well, half.
I disagree.
half-
Allow me.
Sure.
It's not that they're just making things up. Now, we might experience it that way, and I'm not trying to remove the experience from they're just making something up, but from their perspective, it is very systematically, logically, and thoughtfully brought out from expressions from the Torah. So it's not, look, we might say, okay, just because it said it's a tree of life to those who hold fast doesn't doesn't mean that you have to hold on to trees in order to live long lives. I just made that up. But from their perspective, that is, they had a question. Why is it that we like trees so much? Because it's a tree of life to those who hold fast to it, and all who cling to it find happiness. Therefore, that shows us that a tree is likened to a whatever. And my point is, and so from these rabbis, when they were putting together a midrash, it wasn't just them sitting around and giggling and saying, now let's say that they might have, but if they were going to do that, then they were going to then come back with some very, very meaty text, which was going to corroborate what they said. And that text was going to come from the Torah, or I suppose from the Tanakh, one way or another. And if they couldn't come up with some sort of justification or proof text, then they wouldn't have said it. Now, does that mean that it's not just fanciful ideas, which is kind of what you're saying?
No, I wouldn't say fanciful.
Okay, because I thought, okay, fine. Yeah,
So
I thought you said they were
my-
just kind of getting around and they just came up with these
But it was
stories.
midrash, which means to seek, to inquire.
Right.
Well, so we know, this is what I've learned anyway. We know that all of the midrash is to be taken seriously as a sacred part of the Jewish Bible, but only half of it is to be taken literally, because half of it are metaphors, are allegories. The other half are actual stories that play out different principles of the Torah. But you don't know which half. So you read a story in the Midrash and you're not sure, is this literal or allegorical?
Well, yeah, I suppose.
So you have to make
I would
a
say that
No, but
they
you take
thought
it
all of it was
seriously, it
literal.
all has meaning, but you don't take it all literally.
Okay.
I would say that the rabbis, if they came up with a legitimate proof text for it, they would say that it's all God's word. That's why this is referred to as the oral Torah versus the written Torah, because what they did was they took the Torah and that they expanded it not into a New Testament, but rather into a companion testament, and one that was
It illuminates the Torah.
yeah, for sure. That's the Zohar. Because it illuminates, brings light to.
Are there books being written like the Midrash right now by current scholars?
Yeah,
Are there,
but not the same way.
but it's not, they don't have the impact of the Midrash.
Right, okay,
And-
so first of all, correct. Let me give you an example by
I'll ask
way,
you tomorrow
by
night.
way of analogy. I just mentioned the Zohar, which is the mystical text of Kabbalah,
Mhm.
right? So the Zohar is ascribed to Shimon bar Yochai, the rabbi of the Talmud, Rabbi Shimon who's in the cave, the whole thing. Now, we, for the most part, know that it was written not by Shimon bar Yochai, but rather 800 years later by a guy by the name of Moshe de Leon.
Not Tanya, not Rabbi Tanya.
No, Moses de Leon. And again, but Moshe de Leon did not give himself credit for it. Rather, he said it was written by Shimon bar Yochai. Why? Because he knew that if it's written by Shimon bar Yochai, people are going to take it much more seriously than they're going to take it if it's written by him. I assure you, if I write something and say it was written by Rabbi Akiva, you'll be like, oh, impressive. And I'm like, just kidding, it was written by me. You're like, not so impressive. Okay, so starting there, now why did I bring this up was because, modern men, right? So we are writing stuff, but it's not Akiva, it's us. So it's not experienced with the same type of kind of holiness, but also because we don't have that same discipline of writing midrashim for us is how do we make this text meaningful for us, and let's write a story. And by the way, that's something which is happening more in the Reform and Conservative movement. You're not seeing Orthodox writing midrash, not because I don't mean as a pejorative, but because the Orthodox would say, why are we doing this when we have what's beautiful here already? So, but in Reform and Conservative tradition, you see modern midrash that's emerging, and it's responding to issues of our time, or kind of helping to make a text more identifiable for us. But all of that, or little of that, is grounded in the same way that the kind of rabbinic midrash, which was done, which was, here's what I think, and let me explain to you. Here is what Abraham was doing in those days between, God saying, take your son, your only son, and bring him to him, and the day that he did it. What was Abraham doing? Well, I can tell you what he was doing, and I will tell you this based upon this text from the Torah, which says, whatever it is. And so they were more disciplined with incorporating the Torah and Tanakh into their midrashim, which was central than what, let's say, we as modern midrashists might do now. And as a result, so modern midrash is certainly not taken nearly as seriously as the ones of the past.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is the documentary hypothesis a midrash? Would you call that a midrash?
No.
No.
I would call that Wissenschaft des Judentums. I would call that just the scholarly kind of true scholarly attempt to take religion and the Torah specifically and turn it into an academic discipline as opposed to a theological discipline.
Isn't there a book called The Religion of Reason?
Yeah, that sounds familiar to me. Yeah,
referring to the Jews.
Yeah, it sounds very Spinoza-y.
So midrash is not as serious as Wissenschaft.
When you say not as serious, what do you mean by that? It's not as serious of an academic discipline? Well, I would say the rabbis who made the midrash would say it was a considerably serious academic discipline, because it's not easy. I mean, what they did was a remarkable feat and undertaking. I'm only saying that with my modern understanding now, I put much more weight into the documentary hypothesis than I do to the midrash, but that's me now. But I wouldn't say, though, that the midrash wasn't a sizable academic accomplishment, because it was huge academic. I mean, it's the volumes and volumes of writing and text that we have is remarkable. And considering this was all happening at a time in which literacy was a luxury, and we were writing so much on such a high, sophisticated level, and it really is sophisticated. it's in various different languages. I will not say that the rabbinic exercise was not an extraordinary academic accomplishment. It was. I would just say that two different types of academics. Two different types, yeah. So now we're 10 minutes over. Thank you, everybody.
Let me just, while the group is assembled, I just want to say one thing about the Middle East further.
Yeah.
That the Middle East is a